I was born in Chicago and grew up basically in Chicago. As far as music is concerned, when did I start studying music? I would say like about five or six. And because I'm Italian, you can only imagine that I was handed an accordion. So I just started to play the accordion. I think my parents recognized that I had some sort of musical feeling. I don't know what you want to call it, aptitude, maybe that's the word. Because there were three influences: my mother, my father, and my brother. Basically, I grew up, my father listened to Italian opera, so I grew up hearing Puccini even when I was very small. And to me, that I was very sensitive to that music. And I even though I didn't understand the Italian or the language, I still felt the music. So I think they noticed that. My brother was into progressive jazz, and that was Stan Kenton. And so that was like the late 40s or the early 50s. And so I was also into that. And my mother and I would watch movies all the time. So I grew up literally watching whatever was on television in the early days of television, which of course was like Alfred Newman and Nicholas Rosa and the classic scores. And I think, like I said, I got some of my dramatic sense from the Puccini, and I got the kind of crazy, wild sense from my brother. And then I just loved film music. So I think they said, he's got a little musical talent. Hand him an accordion and see what happens. So I started studying when I was like 5 or 6, and I was very, very, I was good. I got to be pretty good. And so I did that till, for a long time. And what happened was around 7th grade, one of the fellows who was at the music school where I studied accordion, he said, you're going to be going to high school. Maybe you want to be in the band. Maybe you should learn to play clarinet. So I said, okay, cool. So I started taking clarinet lessons with him, and eventually from clarinet I went to saxophone. So, and I had really cool lessons. He taught me in a very interesting way. We would have an hour lesson, sometimes a 2-hour lesson, and because he was a saxophone player and a clarinet player, but also played piano and keyboards. So what we would do is we would learn tunes. Just songs, standard songs, and we would learn 3 a week. So he would make me learn them, he would teach me them on the accordion, where I'd learn to play the chords and the melody and everything, and then he would play sax while I played the accordion. And then we switched. He played for me and I learned to play that way. And he taught me, basically we were learning jazz and stuff like that. But the ironic thing, of course, was I ended up going to DePaul Academy in Chicago, and there was no band. But what was weird about it was that in 8th grade, when I started to play the saxophone, a couple other guys in 8th grade said, why don't we start a band, So we started this band. We were called the Gem Tones, and we started playing. So in 8th grade, I was playing gigs, making money, And by the time I got to high school, we were playing almost every record hop in Chicago. A record hop, they used to call them sock hops because they usually were on a basketball court and they wouldn't let you wear shoes, so everybody had socks on. And in those days, they were called record hops because actual artists would come into town. Someone would come into Chicago with their new 45 hit that they were pushing, and they would come to these record hops, give them out for free to the kids and stuff. And quite often, they would even do a tune with us playing in the band. besides, you know, playing records. A disc jockey would play records. But I mean, I played for Sam Cooke, and trying to think of who else. Jackie DeShannon. You know, these are stars from back then. But so we would play for people, and at one time we actually got. The guy said, "You know, you guys are really good. I'm doing a recording next week. Could you come in and play for? I need a band to do the record." So I was like playing in recording studios at 16 years old, which was interesting recording in those days because basically you played it till you got it. There was no overdubbing or multi-tracks. It was 2 tracks and that was it. So it'd be like take 45, you know, craziness. Anyway, so when I got out of high school, my father said to me, "Well, what do you want to do?" I said, "You know," I said, "I don't know. I always wanted to be a film composer. I wanted to be a composer arranger." And many times, I didn't even know why. There was an insurance guy who was a musician, used to come to our house. And at that time, my parents had also bought a piano for me. So I, not that I became a pianist, but I would love to just sit and sort of improvise at the piano and goof around. Anyway, I picked up this book by Russ Garcia called The Professional Composer Arranger. And I figured, well, I got to learn everything that's in this book. So, and this guy was an insurance salesman, musician. Not musician, insurance salesman. I think insurance salesman, musician. And I was, you know, 16, 17 years old. And he goes, I said, "What's this?" I says, "Well, I'm going to learn to be a composer arranger." He says, "There's a million guys who know what's in this book. You know, they can't even make a living." And it was like, it was a real downer. But I didn't get down. I just went, well, man, this is really good stuff. I can learn stuff here. So when I got out of high school, my father asked me what I was going to do because I was either going to be a math major because I was good at math, or go to the music school. Anyway, I chose to go to DePaul University Music School, which where I eventually graduated. But again, the same situation. I got there, and what I really knew was jazz, pop music, and, you know, certain things. But I didn't know a lot of theory. I didn't know. What I thought was the end of the world was Stan Kenton. I became friends with guys, something they liked about me, who were there, who were real players and stuff like that, and they were getting their degree. And they kind of took me under their wing, and they said, "Okay, well, you gotta hear this piece." And I heard Stravinsky and Bartók and Webern and Schoenberg and you know, even late romantic stuff. And I just went, "Oh my Lord, I got a lot of catching up to do." A lot of catching up to do. So I just spent an awful lot of time in the music library just with scores and watching the scores and listening to the music, trying to absorb as much as I could. I thought that was a good thing to do. The other thing, which here's a comedy one, because I was a sax player, and I had just gotten my new metal mouthpiece, and I was Stan Getz. I was hotter than hot. And so since I was a sax player, I went in for my first lesson, my first sax lesson. And at DePaul, in those days, classical music was it. If you were a jazzer, that was, I mean, there was like serial killer jazzer. That was the next thing up from being serial killer. So it was really, really tough being a jazz person in the school. So the teacher said to me, "Well, play me something." You know, I said, "Okay, sure." So I picked up and I played him a couple of choruses. I don't know what the song was, but I played him a couple of choruses of my best Stan Getz thing, you know. And he goes, "You have a very good sense of rhythm." And I said, "Well, thanks, you know." And he goes, "But, you know," he says, "we really have to change your sound." And then he picked up his saxophone and played it. And I mean, my head exploded because it was this classical saxophone sound, this gigantic sound with a big vibrato and just like, and I went, oh my Lord, I didn't even think, to quote Mozart, I didn't think music like that was possible. I mean, what an awful sound. I hated it, but he wanted me to sound like that. So that wasn't going to work for me. So I became a percussion major and studied vibes and drums and things like that. So that was sort of cool. And then the next funny thing that happened was in band class, because I had never played in a band before. I played, I played gigs. I was out making money. I wasn't playing in some band. So the conductor, the bandmaster at DePaul, we went on our first piece, and there was just so many notes on the page, and I'm like, oh, good Lord, I got to play all this. And it was the first time I actually ever sat in a big band where there was a lot of players. I mean, there were like 6 French horn players and 8 trombones and trumpets and all kinds of things. So I'm sitting there, my mind is just going like, oh, wow, listen to this sound. And of course, I couldn't concentrate on what I was supposed to play because I was busy soaking in the sound. Plus, I sounded like Stan Getz. So anyway, the band director stopped. He goes, wait a second. He goes, could I just hear the saxophones? And I went, oh no, this is going to be bad. So I tried to play my part, and he just went, oh my God. Because, I mean, you have to understand, it's not only the sound of the sax, but my interpretation of the music. Because, for example, if you had running eighth notes, a classical player will play them super straight. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and like that. Jazz player will play it doobie 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 doobie, like almost like triplets. So I'm reading the music and I'm playing it essentially in a rhythm that nobody else in the band is playing. So he just put down the baton and just went, oh no. So anyway, but a wonderful man. But after he heard me play, we would play some jazz stuff, and he would like, wow, you can really play. And so he kind of liked me. He took me under his wing. And what he said, he says, Harry, he says, come here. He said, one nice thing he did was that all the seniors at DePaul, they would get to conduct because they were going to go out and teach somewhere. He says, Harry, he says, you should conduct. You're always looking at the scores and stuff. I went, fine. So he let me conduct. And to the point of where he had gotten ill one semester, and I literally taught band the whole semester. I did all the conducting, and we worked on music, and I did the concerts and stuff like that. So I really got pretty damn good at conducting. When it got to finally taking composition classes, the fear was too much for me. I couldn't do it. I mean, I could outplay people, and I could probably just goof around and make more sense than other people. But writing it out and all that stuff was just really hard for me. So after 4 years, I just decided, I think I'll just become an education major, music education major. So I stayed an extra year. During that year, the band director had gotten a letter from Western Illinois University. They wanted a graduate assistant. So he says, Harry, he says, you should apply for this. You can get a master's, and they're going to pay your way. Cool. So I meet the band director from Western Illinois in the train station in Chicago. He was on his way back to a place called Macomb, Illinois, and he was a jazzer. And so he said, oh man, I really think I want you to do this. So I went to Western, and I became a music theory major theory and analysis. I didn't even have to audition. He says they're gonna ask you to play some classical piece. You know, forget about it. Don't even. I want you to do this. So my first week there, this was really cool, and we were doing a football show, which was, of course, I had no idea what the hell you do for a football show, you know. So he says to me, I need an arrangement of the Green Berets. Remember that song, The Green Beret? This was like late, you know, middle 60s, you know, Vietnam War and stuff. So he says, I need an arrangement for that. We're going to have a flag thing that's made out of fireworks on the hill. It's going to be really cool. I go, cool. So I said, I've never done a marching band arrangement before. And literally, I had never done other than arranging for like small groups and stuff like that. He says, it's simple. He says, just remember there's a really high ceiling. You're not in a room. He says, so make sure everything gets doubled and tripled, and so that, you know, everything comes across. Of course, I paid no attention to that and found a different way of arranging it. Anyway, but it worked out really well. So for the next year, I literally wrote a football show every week. I did plus going to school, I did all the football show arrangements. And they were great. I cranked them out like crazy. Once I got my master's, they hired me to teach. So I taught there for 2 years. But I had gotten married, and my wife was from Chicago, and she really missed her family and everything. So we had to, they got me a job at Chicago City College. And so I was teaching at Chicago City College, which was pretty far shake from Western Illinois University, where you had a 100-piece band and a huge campus and stuff like that. Here you were in downtown Chicago. And the other thing that happened is it was unionized. So after 2 years, they didn't want to rehire me. So I was like somewhat devastated and out of work. All through this whole time, I'm still playing gigs. I would even take the train in from Macomb to Chicago, play gigs on the weekend, and then take the train back on Monday. Anyway, so I had gotten a call. Can you help out? Our horn player is missing from the band. He's sick or something. Can you come and play this thing? It was a show band kind of thing. And then you had to play dance music. Okay, cool, I'll go play. So I went on the road for about 6 months. And that was, you talk about something you don't ever want to do. So I had 6 months of absolute, it was terrible. Anyway, all that being said, so at that point, again, even though I was arranging for them and stuff like that, I had decided, maybe I should get a doctorate, because when you don't have a doctorate at a university, you really don't get paid very well, and you're at the bottom of the totem pole. And I said, well, I still can conduct. I'm pretty damn good at conducting. So I'm going to look and see if there's a school that gives a degree with a conducting major. So what was weird about it, there were four schools. And oddly enough, they were the four corners of the United States. There was Columbia in New York, Stanford in Northern California, USC in Southern California, and Florida. So I'm kind of like, well, I'm going to be going somewhere far away. So what turned out that Columbia Teachers College gave me a graduate assistantship, and got some money to pay for classes. So I went there. So anyway, we're in Columbia, and we're in class, and there's a friend there who befriended me. He was busy. He was an arranger, a really good arranger, maybe the fastest arranger I ever met. Bill Ramal, his name was. And at Columbia, I also studied with a fellow named Don Fornuto, and he's the guy who got me to write. You had to write a piece a week. No fooling around. You wrote a piano piece, you wrote a woodwind quintet, you had a week. And you had to bring in the parts, and we played it. So it was like, well, this is what you got to do. And he was a jazzer too, so he sort of related to me. And I think what I wrote was kind of like Rocky and his friends stuff. I'm not even sure, silly stuff. But he liked it, and I went, that's cool. So, but Bill Ramel, he was getting his doctorate. We were in a lot of classes together, needless to say. And he was a big arranger, songwriter in New York. And he kind of took me under his wing, and I did copying for him. I did a little conducting. And then even there were some things where, like, he used to do comedy records. And they were like, we would take little snippets of pop tunes. And so like we'd get behind and he'd say to me, Harry, go play that piano part. And I'm going like, I don't know the piano part. He goes, it's only 2 bars, figure it out. You know, so we play it and I finally figure, okay, you know, and I play it. And then go play the bass part. I said, I don't play bass. He says, it's only 2 bars. How many notes can it be? Figure them out, you know. So I'd go there and usually it was pretty simple. Right, okay, now go sing that harmony part. I don't sing. He goes, go in there and sing the harmony part. He had me doing everything. So one day, we're driving. He was driving me back home after a session. He had a Cadillac Eldorado, of course, you know, and so he says to me, Harry, he goes, what is it that you want to do? I said, really? He goes, yeah. He said, what? I mean, if you had your druthers, what would you do? And I says, I would be a film composer. He looks at me and he goes, well, what are you going to write that Henry Mancini or Jerry Goldsmith can't write? And I said, I don't know. I said, but that's what I want to do. He says to me, well, tomorrow, go to the recording studio. The owner of the studio, who was a genius. This guy worked with Moog. He built this whole studio. He would buy broken microphones and fix them. He was an electronic genius. He built tubas. I mean, he did all kinds of things. Anyway, he decided he wanted to make movies, and especially porn films, okay? So in the back of this recording studio, he had a little editing room and stuff where he was making porn films. So Bill says to me, he says, all right, tomorrow, so you go tell that guy, you'll write the theme song to his porn film. So I walk in the office, hi, hey, how you doing? He says, you're from north side of Chicago, aren't you? I said, why? He says, I'm also good at accents. I can listen to you, listen to someone and tell you where they're from. And I said, well, Bill and I really like your studio, and we're having a great time working here. And I was just thinking, I said, how about if you let me write your theme song to your porn film? And he goes, sure, no problem. I said, okay, cool. All I know about the film is that everybody is screwing around and therefore everything is going bad. Like there's a nuclear, it's kind of like a horror film. Like people are goofing around and suddenly something bad happens. Well, this is the same thing except people are screwing around and something bad happens. So I end up writing this like Bo Diddley thing. Bo Diddley is a lick actually. Like that. Okay. So I write this song, and then I write some goofy lyrics. So I go in the next day, I says, well, what do you think of this? And he goes, oh, that's great. I love it. He says, come here Wednesday at 3:30. I said, okay, fine. So Wednesday at 3:30, he calls down the street was Raisin in the Sun was playing in the Broadway show. And these are the guys who are in the band, the rhythm section for the band. They have a matinee and then they have a show, and they have nothing to do between like 3 o'clock and 7, So I write out this chart, and what cracks me up is that it was Bob Crenshaw on bass. I'm trying to think of the rest of the band, but Bob Crenshaw was like a major bass player. And I had written out this bass part, and I look at him and I go, Bob, I said, man, I said, if I'd have known it was you, I wouldn't have written out this band. No, man, it's so cool. I can figure this out. Yeah, I actually, can I do this here? Yeah, sure. Bob, you do whatever you want. You don't even have to play this part. No, I'm cool. So anyway, so we lay down this track, and sure enough, I have the theme song to this porn film. So now, this guy who owns the studio, he's not, as you can imagine, he's not a guy to waste music. So we decide, okay, well, what else can we do with this? Well, let's make a shoe commercial out of it. So we had a girl come in, and we wrote lyrics for shoes or something. So we wrote a whole shoe commercial, same track, just a shoe commercial. Then a friend of my wife's at the time says, I saw this thing in backstage. Film composer needs assistant. So I go to meet this guy. His name is Arlen Ober, who I began to work with. But what's funny about it is that Arlen, a wonderful man, he's passed away now. I learned carloads from him because he was a great film editor. He was a great composer, and I just learned a lot. But anyway, so I walked in and I said, well, I was just wondering if I'd like to apply for the job. And he goes, well, what have you got? I said, well, I don't have that much. And he goes, here, take this piece of music and orchestrate it for these instruments and bring it in tomorrow. Okay. He looks at it, he goes, great. He goes, okay, here, take all these and orchestrate them. It'll come back in a couple days. Cool. The first film that we worked on was called Angel and Big Joe. It might have been Paul Sorvino's first film. And then we did another one called The End of the Game. It was a documentary. Really cool score, like 5 flutes, bass flute and stuff. It's pretty cool. Anyway, and I was working with Arlen. Angel and Big Joe wins the Academy Award for Best Live Action Short. The End of the Game wins the Academy Award for Best Documentary. So Arlen just goes like, oh man, he goes, I got to go to Hollywood. I can't stay in New York anymore. This is my opportunity to go. So now I'm sitting in New York all by myself in this office, and basically 98% of my contacts were his, not mine. I mean, they knew I was the guy that worked for him, even though we did work a lot together. So I'm sitting in the office one day, and get a phone rings. Hello, and he said, are you the guys who did the score to Angel and Big Joe? Oh yes, we are. He says, well, I've got this movie. It's a children's film. Would you be interested in scoring it? Yeah, I would. So it was called Elizabeth and the Marsh Mystery. Anyway, and I scored it. So meanwhile, the company that did Angel and Big Joe, it was called Learning Corporation. They hired me to do a couple of children's films as well. Anyway, the guy who did Elizabeth and the Marsh Mystery was named Gary Templeton. And I ended up doing probably like 17 films for Gary. We won all kinds of awards for children's films. But right after I did the first one, he says, I got a friend in Connecticut. We live in Connecticut. I got the friend in Connecticut who's doing a children's feature. Maybe you'd be interested in working with him. Sure, I'll go. So his name is Sean Cunningham. So I end up meeting Sean Cunningham, and we do this film called, it wasn't the Bad News Bears, it was called Here Come the Tigers. It was basically the Bad News Bears with no budget. Then we did another movie called Manny's Orphans, but got changed to, I think they changed the name to Kick. It was a soccer film. So it was Bad News Bears soccer. So one day I'm sitting in Connecticut in the kitchen with Sean Cunningham, and he says to me, I'm going to make the scariest movie ever made. It's called Friday the 13th, and you're going to write the music. And I went, okay, cool. Hey. And, you know, we were trying to put food on the table. We were not doing anything. And so we made Friday the 13th. And the rest is history.